All right, good day, everybody. Welcome to the March 2026 Defense Industrial Base Cloud Office Hours from Planet Technologies. This month, we're going to be talking about hardening endpoints for the Defense Industrial Base, practical controls for achieving CMMC L2 compliance. My name is Matt Nevins. I'm a mission executive at Planet, supporting our Defense Industrial Base customers. I'm joined today by Zach Blankenship, who is an endpoint architect on our delivery team as well, who's going to assist me with some demos. So let's talk about the agenda for today. I'm going to start by talking about endpoint security and CMMC and how those kind of map to each other. We'll talk about some applicable control families and how things like evidence and aspects of Microsoft 365 and the security suite, as well as Intune, align to that. Talk about some ways we can harden endpoints, how this all plays into becoming assessment ready ahead of an assessment that you might have pending. We'll do some demos, talk about some key takeaways, and end up with some Q&A. We did have a couple of questions submitted ahead of time, so if you did submit one, we will answer that once we get to that point. So let's talk about why endpoint security is central to achieving CMMC Level 2. Well, there's some pretty straightforward reasons. If we think about how endpoints are utilized today from an adversarial perspective, they're really the place of attack surface that are most vulnerable. They really combine things like access, credentials, data on the endpoint, connectivity, as well as identity. These are really all make them a prime target, and so knowing that the attack surface is there is certainly important for doing that. From a next step, it's really outcome-based compliance. So CMMC itself wants to know, are the protections that you're putting in place enforced? Have you documented them? And is there evidence? Not that you have just deployed, for example, Defender for Endpoint or are managing devices through Intune. In other words, we need to prove what we say we're doing. Remote work certainly has, of course, taken hold the last several years. Users working from just about any location. So again, that attack surface is increased there. In addition, we also want to make sure that if users are off network, we can still get validation of compliance and protection, regardless of where those users are working from. And then, and you'll see this aligned to control families here going forward, is the incident detection and response. And so understanding how things like Microsoft Defender for Endpoint as well as Intune contribute data back to your security tools, whether that be through Sentinel or through a third-party tool. That information is certainly important from a detection and response. And of course, detection and response is part of the set of controls that are needed to be met as part of CMMC. So let's talk about the control families themselves. So there's really four, well, a total of six, but four main areas where the control families align here. So first is the access control. And access control, of course, is going to enforce access to the system, as well as connectivity norms, as well as accessing resources within the organization. So we'll talk about access control in just a second. Identification and authentication. So of course, part of the endpoint obviously is a user signing in and providing their credentials, whether that be to Windows itself or through things like browser-based apps. And so enforcing things like strong authentication or phishing-resistant authentication through passwordless are certainly important. And then there's also aspects to preventing credential theft and security across the identity itself. The configuration management would be the next area. And so there is a whole set of configurations that are generally recommended for being pushed down. And while we don't necessarily use Microsoft security baselines, we use a specific set of policies, at least in our deployments. Those configurations are designed to be able to meet or exceed the requirements. And then system and information integrity. Of course, this is where we're going to make sure that we're protecting against threats and mitigating them, as well as monitoring and logging for any of that information coming into each endpoint. So as we take a look at the control families here, We see there's a couple additional ones I've added here on this next screen. So we talked about access control, IA, CM, and additionally we'll talk about SC, SI, and AU. Interesting chart there to the right, sorry it's a little blurry, identifies, and again we'll jump in a little bit more deeply here in the next slide, talks about the various areas where control families are utilized. So you see that they all have evidence associated with them because of course we need to prove what we're doing. But in addition to that, you can see that there's enforcement, configuration, and monitoring across several of these different control families. And so what that's really means is that there's various different ways that we're going to be utilizing controls or monitoring or processes or policies to build that body of evidence that's required from the endpoint perspective. Diving a little deeper here into control family mapping, we can see that we've got those 6 control families listed on the left-hand side, and just some examples of outcomes, Microsoft capabilities, and then what the evidence artifact might look like. So if we go down this list here, we see a couple that might be interesting. Under configuration management, for example, baselines and drift prevention. And so again, we don't necessarily promote the use of Microsoft security baselines, as there's additional things that need to be done. So we build our own baseline, at least in our deployments. And that's through the use of Intune. And then with drift prevention, we want to look at configuration changes to endpoints, right? So with the way Intune can gather data and also give us a compliance, whether that compliance check-in or a compliance status of an endpoint itself, we can look for that. As another example, you can see that system and information integrity, where the outcome is to prevent and detect malicious activity. We use things like Defender for Endpoint through ASR rules, and then of course the evidence itself is going to be that the rules are there and that we can investigate alerts or incidents as they happen. So I'll pause here just for a little bit of consumption of this content. I think this is a good way to kind of map what the outcome, like I said, what the outcomes are from that perspective. So let's talk about how we harden with focusing on Windows 11 through the use of Intune and Defender. So Windows 11 itself, of course, is going to have quite a few security things built into it. Some of them just need to be enabled. We do that by utilizing Intune to actually push policy and configuration data down to the endpoints. And then from the continuous threat protection and telemetry aspects, we would recommend using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. That could be either P1 or P2 from the MDE perspective, and Intune could be Intune standalone or the Intune suite. But of course, there are inherent things that can also be realized from Intune suite as well as MDE Plan 2. So on the Windows side, we have things like our Trusted Platform module, Secure Boot, Credential Guard, and those types of things that are built into Windows. And so while some of those might be, are all part of the OS, these capabilities together are going to reduce the risk of things like credential theft or kernel level compromise, which are, of course, common concerns with endpoints. So Intune serves as the control plane that operationalizes configuration management and access enforcement through policy creation, configuration profiles, compliance requirements. All those things can be defined to make a standardized set of endpoints settings that can be consistently applied across all of your, in this case, Windows endpoints, though of course Intune can also manage Mac OS, iOS, Android, etc. In addition to that, the compliance policies themselves allow device health and security posture to be evaluated continuously, and that transforms, the configuration state into enforceable and documented information. Really shifts the compliance from a static checklist to the living system that Intune is bringing back data to the telemetry. And then lastly, Defender for Endpoint, that's going to meet a number of various different compliance controls, things like attack surface reduction rules, as I mentioned, behavioral detection, and telemetry that can be gathered allow us to monitor and gather information. And together, those three things of Windows, Intune, and Defender have, I would say, an integrated endpoint security model that allows prevention, enforcement, and like I said, the proof really is the big thing. So how do we demonstrate enforcement? Touched on this a little bit, but demonstrating endpoint compliance really requires showing how policies are enforced and how non-compliance is handled, rather than just documenting the configurations themselves. So through device compliance policies, these will illustrate the idea of evaluating, the OS version, whether it's up to date, secure boot status, the TPM enablement, and all of the different things that translate into clear compliance states. Then we can, of course, use that compliance state to actually restrict access. So, for example, if a device is not marked as compliant, if it's not within the compliance policy posture, we can actually, do things like limit access to resources all up through things like conditional access, or put it into a state that requires, reevaluation and remediation. We can do things like open incidents, etc. Thinking about attack surface reduction, that's another strong demonstration point that you're addressing well-known attack techniques that assessors are going to recognize. So blocking credential theft methods, malicious macros, scripts, all the things that might harm system integrity are all things that the ASR rules are going to demonstrate that you're actually preventing. And then at the data network level, things like BitLocker, enforcing network firewall enforcement, web content filtering, and these types of things are all really ways that we show that we can protect CUI at rest and while it's in use. And then showing things like encryption status of content, et cetera, is really about, again, the demonstration and enforcement of the evidence that you've documented. So if we look at assessment readiness and evidence collection, one of the most common concerns about organizations that are going for their CMMC assessment is really how to prepare meaningful evidence for assessors. That effective evidence really goes beyond screenshots and point-in-time exports. You want to demonstrate consistency, historical enforcement, and alignment to the documented policies that you have put in place. Things like Intune data and the data warehouse are really a key role there. They allow for historical views of the device compliance, configuration state, and policies that might be created and applied over time. And then you can actually show that the controls have been enforced and not just immediately prior to your assessment. There's additional reporting as well that's available through Intune. And so the Intune compliance and configuration reports, as I mentioned, we can show device posture and compliance state over the course of time. And then Defender for Endpoint is going to provide the security recommendations, alerts, investigation artifacts, and support the SI and IR requirements. Lastly, there's audit logs that, of course, tie administrative actions, which are important to document as well. So we can see that if there was a intentional or unintentional aspect of policy change or enforcement that might be coming into play, we can see exactly what happened there. Really getting into that audit readiness mindset really means designing endpoint security from the beginning with the audit or the assessment in mind. Should be clearly documenting these policies, their enforcements, and how they're automated or manually done. And then all of this really transforms an assessment from being stressful into routine from that perspective. So if we look at just kind of putting that more in a chart here, some of the example evidence items that might be there. So for example, the compliance posture of your current compliance posture. Of course, we want to see which devices actually meet the compliance criteria, which is hopefully any device that you're allowing in the network. And again, that can be done through reporting out of Intune. And you can see historical compliance posture, again, through the Intune data warehouse, which is just now in preview in GCC High. And then there's also things like your baseline or configuration assignment. In other words, this is the configuration that we've created within Intune, and those are how they're assigned to various devices. Threat detections and investigations, again, going to be through Defender for Endpoint. and then auditability there from an admin perspective. So a couple of, I think was interesting to highlight some audit friction points, right? So our assessment friction points. These are really some of the things we've seen when we've supported organizations that are maybe doing a mock assessment ahead of their formal assessment, and some of the things we found. So inconsistency policy across device groups. In other words, the way I would put this is Windows devices maybe are being managed through Intune, and they have a set of policies applied to them that is allowing those devices to be marked as compliant and it's acceptable. But maybe on the Mac OS side, there's less management happening, or it's being done through something like Jamf. And so there's a separate set of policies that need to be applied there and documented. And so potentially, maybe rolling device management into one common platform like Intune across Mac OS, Windows, iOS, and Android might be a good place to look for some good consistency there. Undocumented exceptions and legacy constraints. This is an interesting one because, as we know, there are lots of legacy things happening in our part of the world here. We have legacy systems. We have platforms that might need to operate in an air gap way, things like manufacturing devices, et cetera. And all those really need to be documented and potentially remediation applied. And so not only we need to document what the process is for those particular systems, but also why, right? And so that's really important to do. This would have been an issue previously with no historical reporting. Again, as I mentioned, the Intune data warehouse has only recently become available within GCC High. And so that has definitely allowed a more practical way, an automated way, and data-driven way to have historical reporting. And again, as I mentioned, evidence might be spread across multiple tools. This goes not only across configuration management, but also endpoint security too. So XDR, for example, you might be using a third-party product like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne that might be doing some of your endpoint detection and response type things, whereas Intune is doing configuration management. And then you might have another tool that perhaps is doing identity and access management as well. And so having to gather evidence across all of those tools certainly can be a point of friction sometimes, and certainly have seen customers struggle with that sometimes. So with that, we've got a couple of click-through demos here. I'm going to turn it over to Zach, and Zach, just let me know when you'd like to proceed.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, like Matt was saying, device compliance policies are crucial to CMMC compliance for Intune managed devices. These Intune compliance policies allow us to constantly evaluate data from the device, both OS and hardware data, to determine if devices are meeting our compliance requirements. And then we're able to take actions based on that. Those actions can be blocking them from accessing resources, to putting the devices on a pending reset list, to sending notifications to the end user their device is going to be blocked, is blocked, and including a help desk in there so that way they can start remediating that. And these controls range from device encryption to making sure TPM's up to date. We're onboarded with Defender and even custom compliance scripts. If I go to the next page. Here's a few examples of some of the available settings to us. So custom compliance is a really big one. While we can meet CMMC controls with a standard compliance policy, custom compliance controls allow you to break out past what Microsoft directly supports. You can write your own PowerShell scripts to run against the device multiple times a day, and then based on the results that come back, deem a device compliant or non-compliant. And then we can set several other factors based on device health. BitLocker, for example, is a hard requirement for just about every organization, CMMC or not. And then we get into some other properties like device properties, where we can specify OS versions. So we can specify a build number, and if you are older than that, you're deemed non-compliant. And if you're in a legacy environment where you still have a lot of configuration manager and not ready to quite give that up yet, through co-management, you can use the compliance signals from configuration manager inside of an Intune compliance policy. And on top of this, of course, this all connects into Defender for Endpoint. So we can require devices are onboarded to Defender and they're below a threat level. So rather than an alert coming in overnight and a user having access while their device is deemed high risk, you can block them instantly, all without having to do anything. These are all evaluated continuously, and it's all a automatic process. If a user fails even one of these checks, they're just considered non-compliant. And go to the next page. As an example, here's what that looks like from a device perspective. So if I take a generic compliance policy and I assign it to a device, we'll get a response back on each configured setting telling us if it's compliant or not on that setting. So this allows you to identify exactly why a device isn't compliant rather than just getting a block and trying to then figure out what happened. The user won't get a notification about why they've been blocked, but as soon as an administrator logs in to come and look at the policy and look at the device, they'll see exactly what went wrong. And you can look at this at both the device level and at the policy level. So you can see if all of a sudden you have 50 devices that are showing non-compliant for BitLocker, and you made a change to the BitLocker policy yesterday, well, it probably means that the change to that policy is having some problems, and so you can identify this all before it becomes too much of an issue. These settings don't actually, compliance policies don't actually enforce any of these settings. This is just a check to see if something is happening or not, or is being met. For actually enforcing that is left to configuration profiles, which is just like a la carte menu, kind of like a group policy replacement, where we can configure specific settings to meet these goals. Security baselines, which is a configuration offered by Microsoft that stands as more like a hardening guideline. These baselines don't meet compliance goals by themselves. They require additional policies and platform scripts. That is a functionality of Intune that allows us to run PowerShell scripts on devices anywhere they are. So if there are specific settings that need to configure that aren't available in the security baseline or a configuration profile, you can always script it yourself. Let's go to the next page. And then all of these signals are able to be plugged straight into conditional access policies. So Intune by itself is not doing any restriction. So it generates the compliance data that is then passed over to Entra to be used inside of the conditional access policy. There's a lot that goes into configuring conditional access policies to ensure that everything continues to work. But they give us a single checkbox to just make sure a device is compliant. And as long as the device is compliant, we can then grant access. There's additional configuration that has to go along with that to support it, though. It's not just as simple as just checking a box and assigning it to everyone. And go ahead and go on to the next one. So getting into ASR rules, as Matt was talking about, these rules are great at satisfying some of the system integrity controls that we need to meet. These rules take a proactive approach to threat management instead of reactive. So instead of waiting for an alert to be triggered and then blocking whatever activity occurred, and then maybe we'll put in something more permanent to do that block, Microsoft's went ahead and identified the most common threat angles they're seeing, and so they've put together these attack surface reduction rules that prevent those from even being triggered as an alert. So we can just get ahead of these issues rather than waiting on them to happen to us. There's about 20 of these rules. New ones are added occasionally. These do things from blocking credential theft, preventing macro abuse, and even meet some CMMC controls directly with things like a remote code execution. The management of these is done both from the Intune portal and in the Defender portal, and these have a pretty robust logging component behind them. If you want to go down to the next page. So this is what it looks like from the Defender portal when you have one of these policies applied. You can see the policy, every setting, what the status of it is, and what the rollout of it is to all of the devices. So if you're in a very complicated environment, there's a lot of conflicting policies, you'll be able to see exactly which settings are in conflict on devices and on which devices. If we can go down to the next page. So every policy is able to be set, or every rule is able to be set in either block or audit mode. And every time it is triggered in either mode, it's going to be logged in the Defender portal, and you'll be able to come in and see exactly what is being triggered and either put in exclusions or just monitor. If there is something that's being blocked, you just come in here, grab the details you need, add an exclusion into that rule, and users are good within a few minutes to go back to what they were doing. This allows us to cut down on user impact because we can watch everything in audit for an extended period of time before flipping things over to block. Typically, when we're doing this in an existing environment, we recommend letting this sit in audit mode for a period of time, and we can monitor it with you and get those exclusions configured rather than trying to add exclusions as it's stopping users from doing their work.
Great. Thanks, Zach. I want to point out one thing too. I'm glad you brought up the availability of audit mode within MDE, for example. For organizations who maybe haven't gone into the deep end of the pool on MDE and maybe are using another product for their XDR, audit mode is great with MDE because you can actually see data from the endpoints without having the two tools step on each other. So the ability to gather data and make a determination, maybe, hey, yeah, it would be a good time for us to sunset our existing tool and transition to MDE for XDR. It's a great way to be able to pull in that data and compare and contrast, how your current tool works against the same things that MDE does. So just a little tidbit there I always like to talk about. So just some key takeaways. So endpoints are really the most visible and impactful layer for CMMC assessments because they sit at the intersection of identity, access, configuration, and threat protection. Organizations that treat endpoint security as a foundational capability rather than a technical afterthought definitely positioned well when trying to meet objectives for an assessment. Of course, M365 includes a lot of core capabilities to address this, as I mentioned, across Windows, Intune, and Defender. It's really about making sure that they are configured and operated properly to meet those compliance requirements. Really, again, the continuous compliance approach is also really important. As we like to say, compliance is an ever-evolving activity that needs to be treated as something you guys do every day. This is something that has daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly tasks associated with it. And so making sure that your endpoint strategy is aligning with that is certainly important as well. And then, as I mentioned on the previous slide, simplifying and standardizing the process that you have in place for evidence gathering and for preparing for an assessment is certainly going to put you in a great spot. So with that, I will go ahead and answer the two questions that did get submitted ahead of time. One was submitted, and it is, I would like to understand how GCC High would be evaluated for compliance with the L2 controls and if the built-in assessment tools are accurate and provide good control evidence for auditors. So this one I did need to go over to my compliance team to get an answer from, just because I think it's important to have the right context for what the answer really is. In reality, there is built-in tools like Compliance Manager that are available in M365, and that's great for assessing against a Microsoft-built checklist. And while there are specific compliance frameworks that are defined in there, like CMMC and NIST 171 and others, the problem is that it's really assessing that against what it knows about your environment. There are ways to use that as a place to gather some evidence, but the reality is the evidence that gets generated from Compliance Manager, for example, is really not going to be usable by any auditors. They're going to look for more compelling evidence and that the controls are being met. And they also want to observe and look at the configuration and policies directly. So a great place to kind of understand where those things intersect is likely the shared responsibility matrix that's available and out there. I will go ahead and put a link to that in the chat as well. But unfortunately, using Compliance Manager, for example, not really a way to shortcut any evidence gathering or body of evidence, and it really would focus on the evidence across both technical and policy and those types of things, getting them together as a body of evidence and using that. So hopefully that helps for the person who asked that one. The other question that was asked was, are there any CMMC L2 baseline configs that Microsoft offers that could be used? And then Zach, I think you could probably give a good answer to that one.
Yeah, so Microsoft has a bunch of security baselines. These are always positioned more as a hardening tool rather than a compliance tool. They do meet some of the controls, specifically their Windows 10/11 security baseline. It does align with some of the controls, but by no means does it meet all of them. Enabling these is a pretty good first step. It is far more valuable as a security tool than I think a compliance tool. And I always like to throw a little caution around when enabling those. It's a few hundred settings. So enabling them all at once in a existing environment can sometimes have some negative impacts. So a more targeted approach when we're just after compliance tends to be the recommended route.
Great, thank you. Was there any other questions that folks had? If not, really appreciate everyone joining today. We'll be back next month with another session, which you should find out about shortly. And again, thanks for joining us today, and really appreciate the time, and have a great rest of your week.